With this, we have come to the end of the oration. And again, I thank the chairpersons and specifically our speaker, Professor Barua. And we close this session now. And we move over to the next session, which is resident showcase in neurology. So there are three cases which will be presented by three senior residents. And for this session, we have Dr. Monica Thomas as chairperson. Dr. Monica Thomas. So I request her to handle the session now. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. It's been a grand feast. Thank you, Achal, and thank you, Debashish. Fills me with nostalgia for my own time as resident in the All India Institute. And as someone said, we're from a different generation. We actually showed flashcards and transparencies and used an epidiascope. So today to have a virtual conference is really like the stuff that sci-fi is made of. But it's good to know, even based on recent literature, that the primacy of the clinical examination has not been lost, and that history taking alone can come up with the diagnosis, with the correct diagnosis, maybe 3 times as frequently as the physical examination. So I hope the residents who are going to present will display the, those skills of clinical examination, of history taking. So let's start with the first. There are 3, so whoever is ready can go.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so thankful to everyone giving me this opportunity to speak about my case over here. So coming to my case, my patient is Mrs. I, 49 years old housewife with no prior comorbidities, headache for 3 months, bilaterally diffuse, dull aching in nature with frequency of once in a week, with a severity of 4/10, not interrupted daily activities, and except she feels tired after work for some time in standing posture. No specific exaggerated or relieving factors, sir. So there is no progression for a period of 3 months, but after 3 months, on one fine day when she was in a prayer, so she had a sudden severe intolerable headache. She never had such severe headache. Initially in the occipital region, later became diffuse with a severity of 10/10. This was not associated with any disturbances in conscious level, no associated vomitings or weakness in the limbs. This headache not responded to the oral analgesics, for which this was persisted throughout the day and disturbed her life, for which she was admitted and noticed to have normal vitals and NCCT brain reported as normal, for which received injectable analgesics, and she had partial relief from the pain. And she was discharged on day 3 with 2 analgesics and amitriptyline. So at home, she noticed that her headache used to worsen within 15-20 minutes of standing and relieving in 20-30 minutes after lying down positions. She prefers to lie down all the time as she felt severe headache while she was doing activities and affected her activities of daily living. She could not focus on interactions that were happening at home, and for which she required analgesics thrice daily, otherwise she could not tolerate her. No history of trauma, fall, assault, surgery, LP procedure, or nasal discharge, or nose blockage, or congestion in the eyes, nose. No photophobia, phonophobia. She never had fever and normal vision. Now, past personal family history is not significant. So coming to the symptom analysis, she's a 49 years old lady with 4 months history of headache with moderate severity, which was holocranial, initially non-progressive for 3 months, followed by sudden severe headache with postural variations that worsens on supine positions without any altered sensorium or vomiting, sir. So from the symptom analysis, so I consider the likely possibility of the secondary headache. From the huge list of secondary headaches, I consider the following 5 headaches with postural variations like cervicogenic headache or POTS or colloidal cyst, and the post-surgical causes and spontaneous intracranial hypotension. Coming to the cervicogenic headache, there are some diagnostic clues like headache associated with flexion rotation movements of the neck, restricted neck movements, and provocative movements like flexion and rotation movements leads to appearance of the symptoms or worsening of the existing symptoms, and dissociation of the cervical lesions like trauma, and the resolution of the symptoms with the treatment of the cervical lesions. Either it is a unilateral or bilaterally symmetrical, which was actually not there in my patient. And there are some image clues for the cervicogenic headache like cervical root or cord compressions and spinal canal narrowing. Coming to the POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. If you look into the picture on the right hand side, so there is once the patient stand up, there is a increasing in the heart rate more than 30, and without any fall in the blood pressure. The diagnostic criteria also tells the same thing. There is a sustained increasing the heart rate more than 10 in the standing position, and reproducibility of the symptoms with every time when the patient stands up, and absence of the orthostatic hypotension, sir. There are three subtypes like neuropathic or hypovolemic or hyperretinesic, and it is important to know the subtype also, as the treatment varies in the three types, sir. So there are cardiovascular symptoms like lightheadedness, palpitations, exercise intolerance, and syncope, and a few non-cardiovascular symptoms gives you a clue is like fatigue, anxiety, tremors, nausea. And tilt table test, autonomic function test, and thyroid function test will helpful in the diagnosis, sir. And the colloidal cyst, I consider this because in this case also there is a postural variations of the headache. This is a slow-growing mucus fluid filled cyst. 1% of the intracranial mass lesions and 20% of all intracranial intraventricular mass lesions. Common locations are anterior roof of the third ventricle at the foramen of Monro. If you look into this picture over here, this is the frontal horn of this lateral ventricle, and this is the third ventricle. The junction at the junction, this is the most common site in the sagittal and coronal view. So if this is a benign cyst, very slowly growing. Most of the time, this is asymptomatic. If there is a rapid growth of this colloidal cyst, there could be a possibility that there is an obstruction bit of the CSF flow from the lateral ventricles to the third ventricle, leads to hydrocephalus and enlargement of the lateral ventricles with normal third and fourth ventricle. And like the headache, the postural headache is because there is when the patient stands up, fluid and the pressure rises and headache worsens, and that relieves on the lying down position, sir. And there are some other symptoms like raised ACP symptoms like nausea, vomiting can be associated. Here the picture shows that this is a colloidal cyst at the junction of these frontal horns in the third ventricle and leads to the enlarged lateral ventricle, sir. And the Kyrie malformations like problems at the foramen magnum and cerebellar tonsillar herniations. If you see the pictures, there is a cerebellar ectopia and even the distal medullary ectopia. These are Kyrie 5 malformations. And the symptoms support suggesting symptoms like worsening headache, coughing, sneezing, and other symptoms like tingling, numbness, and several other problems at these locations could lead to similar complaints. And the last one is spontaneous intracranial hypotension. When there is a dural CSF leak, majority of the leads to secondary to trauma. And the headache is classically, there is a postural variations, which I already explained, that appears in 30 minutes of standing and relief in 20 minutes of lying down positions. Some image supportive features like subdural fluid collections, meningeal enhancements, engorged veins, pituitary hyperemia, and sagging of the brain. These are the same image findings. This is the meta-analysis published in the last month. Most common is the diffuse pachymeningeal enhancements followed by the venous engorgements and then brain sagging and enlarged pituitary gland. Coming back to my patients, she had normal vitals and normal blood pressure, normal heart rate and blood pressures in supine and standing position with normal cognition and higher mental functions. Cranial nerve examination is normal, no papilledema, normal sensory motor and cerebellar examinations. So when we do a CT at the first presentations, there is a thin subdural collections and the slit ventricles and then effaced ventricles, which were actually missed at the presentations. And the MRI was also suggesting the subdural collections and the slit ventricle and effaced ventricles. When there is a post-contrast T1 image showing diffuse pachymeningeal enhancements and the other similar findings which I mentioned. So in the spine imaging, there is a long column of the CSF leak along the dorsolumbar spine, and there is a leak at the lower part of the T3 level. So we proceeded initially tried with bed rest and the caffeine, which was not helpful. And the specific management about the blood epidural plus 20 ml was in the patient's own blood was injected into the epidural place with 24 hours rest and started her activities at the day 2. And she was mobilized at day 4 without any symptoms. So after she followed up once in every 3 months for over a period of 1 year, and her analgesic requirement was decreased, and she doesn't require any epidural patches. And in the repeat imaging was also showing there is no active CSF leak. In the meta-analysis, in the pooled symptom analysis, the most common symptom noticed was orthostatic headache. In the image findings, the most sensitive was MR myelography, MR and digital subtraction myelography in the lateral position is most sensitive to pick up the exact specific site. CT myelography is picks up the high flow leaks, and MR myelography can detect the low flow leaks. MR myelography is with Feaster sequence is a T2 weight sequence with long TRT and 3D volumetric study, high sensitivity specificity to detect the exact locations. In the treatment and outcomes, majority 75% failed the conservative managements. There is no subgroup analysis. About the specific managements, 60% has a successful rate with the first epidural plus, and the similar successful rates with non-targeted as well as targeted epidural blood pressure closure. So small blood pressure closure is done with less than 20 ml, and large EBP was done with more than 20 ml. So coming to the last two slides, sir, there are some possible misdiagnosis because as there is cerebellar tonsillar ectopy can mimic like Kyrie malformation, subdural collections can mimic like subdural hematoma, and pachymeningeal enhancement may be confused with meningitis, sir. And the conclusion is consistent postural headache in standing position should have high suspicion about the SIH. Early and exact identification of the CSF leak that leading to its closure gives you the better results. And the primary aim in the management is closure of the CSF leak rather than its sequelae. And the complications you should keep it in mind are CSVT or subdural hematoma and then cerebellar tonsillar herniations. You should keep it in mind. And your primary aim should be management of its closure rather than its sequelae. These are my references, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak about my clinical. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Govinda. Just want to go back to your list of differential diagnosis. I mean, yes, it was the worst ever headache. So straight away, there was a red flag about a secondary cause. But for you to begin with cervicogenic headache for such a catastrophic presentation, I would argue with that. So I think, you know, to stick to, and in fact, even though there was a normal CT scan, whether this patient should have had a CSF, because that kind of severe headache at the onset suggests that something had happened. So I don't agree with your first differential diagnosis being a cervicogenic headache. But
Yes,
very
ma'am.
interesting, and thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes.
A very good evening to all. Myself, Debabrata Datta, senior resident from GV Pant Hospital. I would like to thank the organizer for giving me this opportunity. Sleepless in Seattle, it is a romantic comedy film. Although here our story is neither romantic nor it have any comedy. Our story is Sleepless in Punjab. A 62-year-old non-diabetic normotensive gentleman from Punjab without any addiction and without any other comorbidity presented with the chief complaints of inability to sleep since past 2 months along with the abnormal behavior since last 1.5 months. The patient underwent an uneventful bilateral knee replacement on 17th of October. Immediate post-op period was also uneventful. After the 2 weeks, during the hospital stay, he developed inability to sleep at night. There was sleep initiation difficulty, sleep fragmentation. Patient was not able to sleep more than 60 to 90 minutes at a time during night and started sleeping in daytime for 3 to 4 hours only. Attendant also noticed some abnormal behavior during the sleep, and he also had new onset pain in both thigh and legs that was not present just after the operation. And after 2 weeks of the sleep disturbances, the patient developed abnormal behavior in the form of delirium, visual hallucination, and delusion, which progressed gradually. During the daytime, he used to act like cutting grass, milking cows, and stereotyped behavior like rubbing of palms, fingers, and clapping. This behavioral abnormality was fluctuating, and sometimes he was unable to identify some of the family member. This is the sleep video of the patient. Here in this video, we are seeing that there are some kind of movement, particularly automatic movement in the hand as he is milking cows. The attendant said that this present throughout the sleep. There was no history of any aggression, disinhibition, apathy, or language dysfunction, no history of any autonomic dysfunction, no history of seizure, loss of consciousness and headache, no history of fever and rash. The patient first consulted with psychiatrist and diagnosed as a case of post-operative psychosis and started taking multiple medications. These were olanzapine, donepezil, memantine, lorazepam, and quetiapine. So with this short history, as these symptoms developed within 2 weeks of the operation, post-operative psychosis is a possibility. Although the patient's symptoms did not improve with the antipsychotic medication, second possibility was metabolic encephalopathy. Because of the rapidity of the development of symptoms and predominantly sleep involvement and cognition and behavioral abnormality, autonomic encephalitis was also a possibility. Considering the age of the patient, paraneoplastic encephalitis can also be considered. Now on the clinical examination, the patient was conscious but not oriented to time and place. MMSE was 19. On blood pressure examination, there was fluctuation of blood pressure. Sometimes it shoots up to 160, 180, and sometimes it goes down to 60 and 70 millimeter of mercury systolic blood pressure. Rest of the cranial nerve examination and the entire neurological examination was unremarkable, except some rigidity was present in all four limbs, probably due to the multiple antipsychotic medications. Now, after the detailed examination, we have found that there are random twitching movements as well as continuous undulating or rippling movement. That in this video, we are seeing that there is continuous undulating movement over the triceps muscles. This movement was also present in the other body parts. With the same history and examination, we have ordered the following investigation. There was hyponatremia. There was high anti-TPO level, though the thyroid profile was normal. Anti-nuclear antibody and the serology was negative. And with CSF, there was only mild elevation of the protein. And we have done the NCS. There was only minimal reduction of conduction velocity in all recorded nerves with mild prolongation of distal latency in bilateral median nerve with normal SNAP, CMAP, and the F waves. But in EMG, we have found there was continuous discharges in the form of droplet and triplets. Here in this video, this is the deltoid muscle EMG. We are seeing that there is a quadruplets. This movement, this EMG recording are present in other muscles also. Now come to the MRI. The T1 and the T2 sequence of the patient was normal, but there was subtle hyperintensity seen in the T2 flare MRI over the bilateral limbic area of, and the medial temporal area, and there was no contrast uptake with T1 contrast image. So we have sent the serum autoimmune encephalitis panel as it came out to be Caspar-2 was strongly positive and LGI-1 was weakly positive. So our patient had subacute onset sleep disturbances along with behavioral abnormality, rippling movements in different body parts, and EMG suggestive of peripheral nerve hyperexcitability, and his Caspar-2 and LGI-1 both are positive. These features fulfills all the core symptoms and signs that are present presents usually with the conductin associated protein like 2 antibody mediated encephalitis. So our diagnosis was Morvan syndrome. As all we know that Morvan syndrome has a strong association with the malignancy and myasthenia gravis. We have done the CT thorax abdomen anti-acetylcholine receptor binding antibody and whole body PET CT. All these are normal. We have treated the patient with pulse methylprednisolone for 5 days along with the IVIG at a dose of 400 milligram per kg per day for 5 days. After this intervention, there was significant improvement in sleep, pain in the limbs, behavioral abnormality, along with the NCS and EMG abnormalities. We have discharged the patient with the oral prednisolone 60 milligram and asked him to come in the OPD for the follow-up. Now come to the Morvan syndrome. Although Morvan syndrome is a rare disorder, it was first described more than 100 years back by Augustine Marie Morvan in a case report La Chorea Fibrillari. It is characterized by generalized neuromyotonia, hyperhidrosis, burning pain, fluctuating encephalopathy. The pathophysiology is an autoimmune disorder, especially two antibodies, Caspar-2 and LGI-1 are responsible. They mediate the neuronal dysfunction by direct interaction with the target antigen, and the Caspar-2 expressed in the neurophils and the juxtaparanodal region of the CNS, particularly in the hippocampus, locus coeruleus, raphe nucleus, hypothalamus and thalamus, explaining all the clinical features of Caspar-2 associated autoimmune encephalitis. And interestingly, it is a syndrome which is often triggered by surgery, as there are case report of Morvan syndrome after scrotal sac drainage and the chemical installation in hydrocele. It has a paraneoplastic association. There are case report of the Morvan syndrome following thymectomy, and toxin exposure like manganese, mercury, and copper can also manifest in this way. But there are no case report of Morvan syndrome after knee replacement surgery in the literature. This is the largest case series published by Irani et al. 29 patients of the Morvan syndrome, of which 41% had a tumor association, and it is a disease of male with a 93.1% of the 29 patients are male, and neuromyotonia was present in 100%, dysautonomia 93%, sleep disturbances in 90%, and neuropsychiatric manifestation in 96%. The most importantly here in this series, the MRI was normal in 23 out of 25 patients. So the 92% of the
Sorry, Debrata, how many slides do you have left?
2 slides. This is the PSG finding of the 10 patients of the VGKC associated encephalitis, of which the 4 patients had Morvan syndrome, which had a significantly decreased sleep efficiency and the significantly decreased percentage of the N3 sleeps. And the treatment is IV methylprednisolone, IVIG, plasma exchange, and rituximab also. Now come to the conclusion. Any acute and subacute onset neuropsychiatric manifestation, sleep history should not be ignored. Neurological examination for myokemia, particularly in presence of sleep disturbances, is must. MRI is usually normal, but not always, as shown in our case. And diagnosis of Morvan syndrome should not be missed, as it is a treatable disease. It requires long-term follow-up because of association with the tumor and paraneoplastic manifestation. Thank you.
Thank you, Debabrata. That's a completely fascinating study. And I suspect the aspect of humor is from Dr. Debashish.
Yes,
but thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
Could we have the last presenter, please?
So thanks for this wonderful opportunity. I will present an interesting case of difficulty in speech and swallowing. So a 45-year-old right-handed female educated up to graduation working as a Hindi teacher presented with chief complaints of sudden onset of loss of speech and difficulty in swallowing since 1 hour and 30 minutes after awakening from sleep of 1 hour. So last known well period was 2 hours or 30 minutes. She was not able to produce even simple words. She was only able to make some grunting sound. Her comprehension was intact and she was able to communicate well by reading and writing well-formed sentences. She also had marked difficulty in chewing, swallowing, and sucking with a straw. She had marked pulling of saliva at that time, and she had difficulty in opening her mouth fully. Also had difficulty in moving jaw side to side and moving tongue inside her mouth. She was not able to feel air inside her mouth, blow, or protrude the tongue. Although she was not having any history of weakness or sensory symptoms in any of the limbs, there was no history of any vertigo, vomiting, difficulty in vision, taste, or hearing, no history of any loss of consciousness, seizure, or palpitation. Her vitals were normal, and CT scan was suggestive of bilateral parietal and left occipital cortical gliosis. As we can see here, bilateral parietal, cortical, and subcortical, and along with left occipital gliosis was there. So this was her video on presentation. She was not able to show her teeth. She was not able to open her mouth fully. She was not able to even move her tongue inside her mouth. She was not able to protrude her tongue. But she was able to move all 4 limbs on command. So there was no any limb weakness present at that time. So she was hypertensive since last 5 years. She had rheumatic heart disease in form of mild MS as per her 2D echo report done 4 years back. And she also had history of 2 episodes of CVA in form of left lower limb monoparesis in February 2018 and right upper limb monoparesis with right human facial pulsing in December 19, which both were recovered completely within the span of 4 months. She was on antihypertensive aspirin 75 mg and atorvastatin 10 mg. However, she was not on any anticoagulants. So at this point, due to patient had symptoms after awakening and due to probable history of some stressors at that time, we kept the possibilities of wake-up stroke and functional disorder. So immediately we went for an MRI, which suggested acute infarct in the posterior half of the right inferior frontal gyrus, which was flare negative. And also there was some changes in the T2 flare over the bilateral parietal, cortical and subcortical region, along with right parietal subcortical lacune and left parietal microinfarct was there. So at this point, we were at 2 hours and 20 minutes since symptom onset. So NHS was 77 out of 42. ECG was normal. Considering her disability very significant, as she was a teacher, we thrombolized her, and 6-hour post thrombolysis status was same. Next day, repeat NCCT head was done, which was same, and RT tube inserted because of she was having severe dysphagia. Next day on examination, she was not able to blow, whistle, provide suction movement, or show her teeth or move her tongue in neither on command nor to imitation. However, she could cough, yawn, and swallow sputum automatically, and her head preserved natural smile. That was automatic movements were intact, but gag reflex was absent and short palate was drooped. Also, her bilateral plantars were extensor. However, corneal reflex, jaw jerk, and vocal cords movements were normal, and there was no upper face disturbances or ophthalmoplegia. So this was her video on day 2. She was very well able to communicate by writing, but she was not able to suck through a straw. There was marked drooling of saliva, and also she was not able to blow. Here is one kind of written sample of her. So we, after investigating her MR angio was normal. 2D echo was suggestive of moderate MS with mild MR with normal ejection fraction and LA size, without any thrombus. So we started on tablet acetrom, ACE inhibitor, and metoprolol, and given speech therapy and advised for transesophageal echocardiography. So this was her investigations and treatment given during the course of the hospital. Now let's see how she progressed during the hospital course. So this is her video on day 6. We can see her smiling very spontaneously. We can see her upper teeth visible at the time of spontaneous smile. But on asking to do so on command, she had marked difficulty in showing her teeth on command, and also on imitation also. Her vocals were also markedly affected. Only improvement at this point was she was able to open her mouth a bit. Modified labials also were affected. However, on day 15, she markedly improved her articulated labials, alveolars, palatals, all improved except for her gutturals. She was not able to tell gutturals at the day 15. And also she had right human facial palsy at this point. Gradually her dysphagia improved very well, and on day 30 she was completely recovered from her dysphagia.
It's been great, and you must give me some points because I've made up for lost time. We're only half an hour behind schedule.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for this privilege.
Yeah, I thank all the 3 residents and Madam Monica Thomas for this particular session, which was a resident dependent session. Thank you all.